Okay, so I'm recording. I'm recording the whole thing. Yeah, so you have that. So if you wanted to look at it, so for the people who haven't been able to show up, they'll be able to at least hear the conversation and then also see the slides. Okay. Any questions about the peripheral model? You guys got that? So the guy's name, Harris, and the years 1990s. Go ahead and put Atlanta for an example of a city. And it grows in these edge cities along the ring road. And the ring road is like a highway like you would see in Atlanta or like around Jacksonville, often called like a bypass. And they're not cities as in, a legal definition of a city like what we're going to go over, but they almost function like little cities, and they kind of like little suburban areas, and also galactic city model. Do you guys have any questions about the peripheral model? Just another urban model. What's that? Atlanta. Yeah, Atlanta is the example of a city. It's not the only one, but that's a good example with that ring road. Yep, question? Boombergs, yeah, these are these are on your AP Human Geography list here. A boomberg is something that grows up really fast, like a suburb that looks like it's all the same. So those, like, if you ever, you like driving something, you see like on the hillside, like all the houses are exactly the same, and it just like went up really fast. It's like a boom. So a boomberg is like cookie cutter. I forget what a greenfield is. An uptown is kind of like, it's more fancy. If you think about, a suburb that's a little bit more swanky, kind of, like uptown versus downtown, kind of. Those are really a little bit nicer. Greenfields, I don't remember what that is. I can get back to you with that one. I forgot about that one. So. Probably, maybe you have to know that. Maybe not. I don't know. If you look at like where people live, 80% of the people live in some kind of urban area. Suburb counts as urban area, whereas about 20% live in a rural area. All right, any more questions at all just about peripheral? We're going to move on. So we're just going to kind of just march through all of this and just kind of make sure we understand what the concepts are. I didn't want to do some complicated classwork because we're missing half my students, so we're just going to kind of march through it and watch some. I've got a few things for you to watch too. If there's no questions, I'm going to move on. Okay. This, we'll go ahead and go through each of these. Okay, so when you look at the three ways to define a city, defining a city, an urban settlement, the first one is that legalized city. And I wanted to have the map up to kind of help demonstrate what each of these is. And feel free to add some notes to help you understand. So the legalized city is the city that has a CBD and like the city boundary line. So here, looking at city of St. Louis, this kind of reddish color is the city of St. Louis. There is city boundary lines. The people that live within the city boundaries, they pay city taxes, they vote for the mayor, they have certain maybe bills or laws or things that would be passed just for them as city residents. Maybe they have special services available to them, like maybe free public transportation, or maybe they recycling or trash pickup or something like that. So that's the very smallest part of an urban settlement. It's the city and the city boundary lines, including the CBD. All right. What's the second one? Talk at your group. What's the second one that you define an urban area? There's three. What's the second one? Talk with your group. Make sure you guys all get it. Okay, so the second one is, what is it? It's like urbanized area. So this urbanized area. So, all right. So also called an urban area, urbanized area. Okay. So that right here, basically the urbanized area is the suburbs, pretty much. So when we look at this map of St. Louis area, the kind of the goldenrod color is the urbanized area. And it's very crowded. It has a certain population density. It's definitely the suburbs. So if you live within the city limit, or if you live in a suburb, then you're living in the urban area. So it's another way to describe the urban area. So would Lake Nona be qualified for an urbanized area? I think it's yeah, probably 50,000. Yeah, maybe on the verge, maybe not quite. Maybe Waterford Lakes, area, Conway, like these areas. So it's usually very, very crowded, more this suburban area. All right. So I think my definition here, you had to have at least that 100% like square people per square mile. So it's definitely exceeding a certain kind of density. And that third one is the metropolitan statistical area. And this is a functional area. So talk to your table. What's the most important part of a functional region? A functional region. I mean, just define a functional region. What does it have to contain? What's the most important part? As any functional region, what's the most important part? How is it defined? Talk to your group. How is that defined? A functional region. Just any functional region. Any functional region. What's the most essential part of a functional region? What kind of defines a functional region? All right, let me ask somebody randomly. Antarctica, southeast. So, Joseph, that's you. Do you know what defines a functional region? The essence of it.
Like, you're saying something like it's independent?
No, not that. No, functional. An example would be like a radio station. Right, the center point. Yeah. The center point is what is the most important thing about a functional region. It's that node, sometimes called nodal region. So this metropolitan statistical area is, if you look here on the map, this is it's purple here. Metropolitan statistical area, micropolitan statistical area is kind of like a cream color or ivory color. Let me just say right off the bat, don't worry about this core-based statistical areas and combined statistical areas. Don't worry about that. It's too much. It won't be on the test. I doubt it would be on the test. We didn't have that last year. Just simply, let me just give you an idea. This metropolitan statistical area and micropolitan, they're basically the same thing, except this one just has more people in it, has at least 50,000 people, and that has 10 to 50,000. But the idea of the metropolitan and micropolitan statistical area is that this whole area, all of these, counties across state boundary lines, here's Missouri, here's Illinois, all of these counties together make up the functional region of St. Louis. This is essentially a daily urban system. And this is the node. And the idea is that everybody that lives within commuting distance here lives in this urbanized area, or urban area, but it's a functional urban area. So even if you live in a farm, you have 5 acres, and your nearest neighbor's, a quarter of a mile away or half a mile away, but you live in Washington County, You don't live in a suburb. You live kind of in a rural area, but you are within this metropolitan, all these metropolitan statistical areas to form one St. Louis functional region, daily urban system. You are considered in an urban area. It's kind of weird. But the idea is that you are within this commuting distance. This is kind of Brian Barry's daily urban system. So you can define an urban area as the city limits. You can define it as the urbanized area, including the suburbs. Or you can define it functionally as this daily urban system that incorporates these metropolitan or micropolitan statistical areas that are somehow kind of functionally tied to St. Louis. That everybody that lives in those counties, and like I said, it doesn't have to be within even the state. It's across state boundaries. But this becomes the functional region, and everybody in those areas use St. Louis as their, go-to place for all their service needs. I had a really great map that I pulled up, and it wasn't working. So then I pulled up a picture of it, and it's not very clear. It's kind of fuzzy. But this is actually the dark colors are looking at micropolitan statistical areas, and the light kind of, metropolitan and micropolitan. And then the dot would be that central node that everybody within that area would be, going to that city. Now, I don't think they are exactly daily urban systems, but they act like a daily urban system. Because I think Brian Barry's, he only had 171, so it might not be exactly the same.
Well, we're taking influence here, so there's a lot of different.
Yes, we are. Daily urban systems, I think, is not, we're talking about using census tract data, and this is much more formal regions. It has boundary lines. All right, yes?
One thing, so if I think about it, Orlando would be a bit much more smaller than Rubenstein would be.
So Orlando, we'll get to it actually I can go to it pretty quickly here. I'll skip all this stuff here. Oh, there it is. So when we look at Florida planning for the government, this East Central Florida, this probably, I'm pretty sure, I wish I had my map to double check, this would be considered a functional metropolitan region with Orlando. Here's Orlando at the center. Here's the Cape. So here's your Brevard, Osceola, Orange, and all these counties together. Notice this little inset map right there. All those together would be a metropolitan, functional region with Orlando being the center. And all those counties would go to Orlando for their really big service, high service needs, high order needs. So, right. And so, but this is based off of census data and, counties, and grouping all those counties together and creating this one functional region. All right, we'll just get back here. All right. Okay. So any questions about any of these legal city limit, this kind of urbanized area, continuous, and then the functional region? So it's questions. Okay. And most of the United States lives within all of these together. This is the bigger, and it's kind of like stacking, Russian dolls. This is the biggest part, and then this is within it, and then within it right there. All right. So if there's no questions, the next concept was a megalopolis. Megalopolis. So megalopolis is just this continuous, overlapping, continuous urban area. So if you've ever driven like up along the East Coast, and it's like you can't tell where one city begins and one city ends, you are in a megalopolis. That's it. It's just this continuous big urban area. Now, as far as the ones, you don't need to memorize all of these, but I would say for sure you should know the the one here that's called Bosniwash or Boswash, from Boston to New York down to Washington. That whole megalopolis is pretty famous. You can see kind of a Great Lakes area. There's Twin Cities. There's Florida's got one. Texas Triangle. So you got the whole Atlanta one, Piedmont.
I like how, like, everything else is like that and then,
Yeah. All right. So that's a megalopolis. So those are the ones in the United States, but I also want to show you ones in Europe. So European megalopoli, they have, and I'm not sure, I don't know why it would be, I would think blue would be kind of a colder color, so kind of from like London down to northern Italy to like Milan, kind of this industrial belt too. What city is not in that megalopolis? Paris. And if you look at this map too, along the Mediterranean, it's a warmer, what is not? Paris. So France really, I mean, you got part of France, kind of a little bit, in the northeast kind of, and a little bit down along the Mediterranean, but Paris is not a part of that. It's probably not this big industrial area. Has anybody been to traveling around France?
Danny!
Have you? I mean, is it okay? Oh, like I think, because obviously, I mean, Paris is large, but maybe there's not this kind of ongoing. Maybe it's just Paris, and then, maybe it's not as much. Yeah, Anthony. I'm talking about urban.
Oh, okay.
So it could include both. It's like if you're driving along a freeway and it just seems like the one city kind of blends into the next city and blends into the next city. It's almost like there's no agricultural land or there's no farmland in between. It's like you don't have these big gaps. So it's just like this continuous urban spread in a sense. So those are some European ones. And here's some Asian. So Japan, it's almost like from Tokyo, it's kind of like just a spine down the middle of the southern islands. And then you got the eastern coast of China too, Shanghai being very, very big. And you got, we got lots of factories there. When I was there, there's a lot of apartment buildings being built along the coast there. So those are some megalopoli in Asia.
What was like the pollution like?
Bad. Really bad, yeah.
Did you like wear a mask?
Yes. Yeah.
Like I saw a documentary about this basketball player and she had to wear like a mask.
Yeah. Otherwise you can get sick or get asthma or something like that. Yeah, Ricky.
Is that kind of like how the Tokyo Disneyland, it's not actually in Tokyo, it's in Chiba.
Oh.
It's right next to it.
Which is where? Is it going to be?
It's right next to Tokyo.
Okay. Well, Tokyo is around. I don't even know which one is Tokyo here.
It's the one in the middle.
Is the one in the middle? This one here?
No, out of the
Oh, right here?
Yeah.
Okay, one in the middle. Okay.
Right. And so is that kind of like overlapping?
Y-
Is what you're trying to say?
Well, yeah. This is the megalopolis right here. So this is they bleed into the next one. So where's Disneyland?
It's like
Is it
really
north?
close to Tokyo, but it's not in Tokyo.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in Chiba.
Okay. Well, it's kind of like Orlando. We say that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not in Orlando proper. It's in kind of the urbanized area. Yeah, and it's kind of in the general area. But you don't say it's in Shiba. You said Shiba?
Yeah, this is right there. Right next to Tokyo.
Okay.
That's where it is.
Chiba. Okay.
That's where it is.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
One thing, are the metropolitan areas considered kind of like city boundaries or?
Right. So anything you see metropolitan, think of urban.
Okay.
But when we talk about metropolitan statistical area, right, is it part of this greater urban area? But it's not city boundaries, right? There's different ways to define an urban area. City boundaries, urbanized area with the suburbs, and then this functional region of a metropolitan statistical area.
Oh yeah.
Right.
The urbanized area are suburbs.
Yeah, the urbanized areas basically is your suburbs, including the center city. Okay, so now going on to local government. So when you have all these governments, local governments, city governments, county governments, they're all dealing with the same kind of issues, things like traffic or traffic congestion, garbage, affordable housing, pollution, water issues, spreading of diseases, anything like that. And so it's actually better if they can cooperate. So a metropolitan government is a coordination of local governments. So where they kind of meet together, it's kind of like European Union or even like United Nations, where they basically kind of come together and discuss things that would deal with all of them, and they come up with a single plan that will help the whole region develop or help the whole region deal with these common issues. So it's to coordinate local government. That's the purpose. And now there are some forms of like a consolidation is where you combine the city with the county. Maybe the county is not very populated. Maybe the city is, there's a lot more people and then hardly anybody in the county. So, let's go ahead and just combine them all because it's not that big. So a consolidation, when you consolidate, you group together. And then the federation is you've got like everybody, so the local municipality, everybody has their own. I see it. I have one. I'm like it's different. Everybody still has their unique local government, and it's more like they kind of just sit around a table, and all of them will be representatives, and all of them will hear their voice, and they'll all work together to kind of come up with a single plan. But it's again this cooperation and combining, not having to work harder, but kind of work smarter in a sense, not overlapping things that they all do. So work together. And there's an interesting TED Talk, we can look at that toward the end, where they use social media apps to solve a lot of problems that municipal governments kind of come into have or whatever. Cab sharing idea. We have, what's that cab sharing that people have? Uber. Yeah, it's kind of similar there. Not too old. Okay. Any questions about local government? All right. Moving on to so we looked at this the idea that we are this one local government and they all join together, and this is called East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. That's their kind of federation of joining all together, and they meet and plan. And I don't know how often they meet, probably quarterly, every 3 months. That would be my thought. Annexation. So annexation is any time when you add land. All right, let me go ahead and So annexation is basically adding land. Now, it could be like Russia annexing Crimea, all right, against the people's, Ukraine's will. So annexation is broader than just, yes, what's that? Oh, just go. Just say you're checking out. I don't think anybody will. So, but annexation could be adding land to a city. And a city cannot just take over land, all right? They have to get the permission of the people that live on the land that they want to annex, include in their city. Yeah, Joseph.
So, actually, you're probably going to go over this.
Okay, so let me go over it. So, it was popular in the 19th century, in the 1800s. This is looking at Chicago and how Chicago's city limits in 1837 was right here on Lake Michigan. You can kind of see how it grew concentric circles. We talked about that, the concentric model. But then you can see 1870, they annexed this area right outside. And then 1890, 1900, you can see 1930, 1960. So the places that are this color here outside of the dark would be, not annexed. Oh, notice this little inset. This is the Chicago Metropolitan Statistical Area. So all these counties will be with Chicago as their hub, their center, their focal point. Okay, so why would a city annex land? Because they want more tax money. If you live in the city, you have to pay city taxes. So why would people that live in the suburbs in the urbanized area not want to be annexed? Because they have to pay taxes. So they don't want to be annexed. So the city offers certain things to its residents. They get to vote for the mayor. They have maybe free, busing or, public transportation. Maybe they have, trash or recycling pickup or whatever. More and more, the suburbs have those things. So, if suburbs already have these things, or like police or fire protection, all that kind of stuff, then they really might not want to be annexed because it pays more. You have to pay taxes. It becomes more expensive. So now, can a city just take over territory? No. They have to get the permission of the people who live there. There has to be this referendum, this vote, and they have to vote to be annexed. Now, as I was sharing with other periods, sometimes the city government is sometimes a little sneaky. Sometimes they do some midnight deals. Sometimes they draw up some referendums, and so in the fine print or at the very end, if you don't read the whole thing, as you're voting for one thing, you also are voting to be annexed. They've done that before. Government has done that before. So, but that's what annexation. But you cannot do it illegally. You can't just take over land. You have to get the people's vote.
So what about Lake Nona?
So Lake Nona isn't, I would say, probably an urbanized area. If not an urbanized area, definitely in the metropolitan statistical area. And if we wanted to become a part of the Orlando city limits, we would. Now, probably we wouldn't right now, just because we're not really connected. We're kind of far away. And so it would be like, a chunk here and then a chunk here, and that's part of the Orlando. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's almost more like right next to it, yeah.
Sort of like how the O'Hare Field looks like?
Yeah.
Except the O'Hare Field looks like they had it because of O'Hare.
Yeah. Well, it's just because it's, I mean.
Lake Nona is not annexed.
What's that?
Lake Nona is not annexed.
Lake Nona is not part of the city of Orlando. We're part of the urbanized area, or minimally at least the metropolitan statistical area. Yeah.
Even if we were annexed, would we still be called Lake Nona? Or would
No, we would become Orlando. Now what could happen? Well, we're in the greater Orlando. Yeah, so kind of just like that idea, like Chiba is like greater Tokyo. We're still part of the greater Orlando, exactly. We're not Lake Nona. So like Winter Garden is in its own city, even though it's kind of in that area. Now, could Lake Nona incorporate itself as a city? Yes, if they wanted to. Somebody maybe would draw up plans and have some leadership, and then the people that in this area, maybe they would say, we want these boundary lines for Lake Nona, and then you could vote to become your own city, and that's possible. But that means you have to have a mayor, you have to pay for all those things, you have to, it can become expensive. At one time, Waterford Lakes area did that, and it didn't pass. So, because now you've got to hire people, you've got, it's all that, it's not so simple.
And once you're annexed, could you be like, annexed and turn into
I don't know. Maybe you could. I don't know if you could do that. Unannexed. We don't want to be part of the city anymore, so I don't know if you could do that. Yeah, Anthony. I don't know.
It said majority, which would mean
It would just be 51% then if it was a majority, yeah. So, is that what it said, just majority?
I remember seeing majority.
Yeah. But just so you know that you can't do it illegally, you have to have a vote. All right? Any questions about annexation? All right. Then density gradient. And here's an example of Cleveland. So density gradient. So density, you think it's how many people or how many objects per square area. And gradient is looking at like going from very, very dark to very, very light. So if you're doing some kind of artwork, you have something dark and it's shaded a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, and that's a gradient overall. And usually it's this nice smooth transition from dark to light. So looking at basically density, population density, and how it's changed over time, if you look here in 1900, most of the people living in Cleveland lived right in the CBD or very, very close. So you think about it's industrial and people working in factories that are living there, and hardly anybody is living out further away. So there's a huge, great density inside the city. And then over time you can see this movement of people moving out. The gradient flattens. It all becomes more the same color. So the trend is less dense in the central urban areas and increase in density in suburban areas as people move out to the suburbs, resulting in a flattening of density gradient. That means it's all about the same color. It's not a big change from dark to light. It's all about the same shade. Right? So it's flattened. And you can see still maybe a little suburban area. We have a lot more people living in that ring around there. So any questions about density gradient and this change over time? It's become more flat as a same color. Mm-hmm.
So I remember reading when the density flattens, it sprawls out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that diagram doesn't show it's sprawling.
Down here, or
You know,
as in getting
as
bigger.
The boundaries don't
Yeah.
get bigger.
Right, exactly. I'll show you some images of time-lapse cameras of sprawling in some of these big cities. Yeah, and it should become wider and dispersed, further dispersed. All right, if there are any more questions, then we're going to move on. What's the next one? Cost of suburban sprawl. All right, this is our last little section.
Yeah.
So let me go to my visual, and then I can go back to this. So it was similar. It was a little bit different colors. This is from last year's image. So the United States, when they grow as a city, here's your city boundary limits right here, and then you've got your suburbs at different time periods are just further out, and then as time goes on, you see it almost like Swiss cheese get further and further and further, and developers will buy land further out. It's cheaper, and they maybe just buy that land and kind of hang on to it for a while. But usually that land out there doesn't have electricity, doesn't have water, it doesn't have roads. It's undeveloped. So there's lacking infrastructure. But once things, it seems like there's a demand for housing, they'll start to develop, and they'll put in the structure, they'll put in the electrical and the plumbing and the roads and stuff like that, and they pass that cost on to the homeowners that buy it. The problem with this is that we have this huge cities that just sprawl out, and we waste all this land, farmland, and then if you live way out here, and I see this in LA, it takes a long time to commute to the city if you're working in the city. So it's wasteful of energy as you're driving. It's a lot of pollution. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of traffic congestion as you're moving into the city. And then again, like this waste of this green space for possibly farming, or at least kind of just having this natural green space. Well, UK and other European countries are very different in how they sprawl. When they have, you can see the different time periods, they have some suburbs up here, and then they just attach, continue to build contiguous right next to it. There's no empty gaps, no Swiss cheese idea. But they're all connected to, you see the railroad and the road, they're all connected, and they have preserve these nice green spaces around each of those little suburban areas. So I can go back to these notes if anybody wants to kind of look at that. So like I said, developers buy up large tracts of land. It's undeveloped, it's super cheap. They kind of hang on to it for a while. Then it lacks all this infrastructure, so they build that, pass it on to the buyer. Often the tracts are not contiguous, they're not next to each other. I've seen this called leapfrog development. So they kind of leapfrog over other ones, and so you don't just fill in the gaps. And it's very wasteful, but Europe is much better. So the smart growth, the idea is to limit that sprawl. So maybe fill in some of the gaps, or define a boundary line, and then you can only go up to that point. So that's kind of what Europe does. Helps to preserve that farmland. You're not trying to take down any more farmland. You want to preserve the farmland, reduce the traffic congestion, reverse the inner city decline. People leaving the inner city to kind of keep it all more, urbanized area all together, all contiguous. Yeah.
I remember saying in the book it said that, like, because of like the size of the U.S., like the sprawl doesn't really take away from the farmland it has.
Right, because we have so much. Yeah. Unlike like Europe, where it's not as big. Yeah.
Because like the UK is like the size of one U.S. state.
Yeah.
Of land to waste, but like.
Yeah.
So would it matter as much in the
Well,
U.S. to sort of curb that? Or?
Well, I think, we are very efficient in how we farm. So we have our farmland, and you're right. It doesn't, really waste. We're not using those little spots right here so much to farm because we use big farmlands. But it's still wasteful as far as energy of movement back and forth. Ricky, did you have a question? Yeah,
What do you mean by
it wastes agricultural land. It's not a good use of land that could be used for agriculture. Oh, that's right. I see your, yes, okay. So the cost of suburban sprawl, it's maybe better to say a poor use, or not waste agricultural land, but I can't think of, but you're right. It's not a cost to suburban sprawl. The fact that it's a poor use of the land, that it's maybe impinging in other land that would have been used for farming. Okay. So, thank you.
Who are the developers?
The developers are usually private, very wealthy developer company that would just say, they have a bunch of money to invest. No, it's not the government. Yeah, it's private organizations like Tavistock. Right? That's the big developer here. So they have a lot of money, they buy up the land, and they develop it, and then they get people to buy the things that they do or rent. Yeah. Daniel.
So wait, one thing, about urban sprawl. So are cities allowed to do developing in their metropolitan areas?
Cities, like the city government?
Yeah.
Usually, there is city government-owned property. So yes, they could. They do it. Often you see, that's more private enterprise, developers. But there are, when we watched it, we looked at the Gorilla Gardener guy in L.A. He said that the city actually owns, a number of, empty lots. So the city does own property, and they could develop it for them, for themselves, for public buildings or for parks or something like that. So they could. Okay. Yeah, Joseph.
So, in other countries or around the world, do governments, instead of developers, do what developers here do?
You might have where you have government policy and regulation on developers and saying, hey, these are the restrictions for developers and the land that they can purchase and how. So I do think that happens. Not so much in the United States. We tend to have looser regulation. So I do think that there are requirements or limitations on developers and what land, and the government imposes those.
So
yeah.
Did the U.S. have consideration?
Probably because it's costly to enforce, but you also think about who are the developers at private companies, and often they give lots of campaign money to people in government, and so they kind of give them those favors, and yeah, so often happens, yeah. Yes, It's not, it's my microphone, so it's I know, like, it's not a camera on me. You're just going to hear my sound, my voice, and then see this. But this is my microphone, actually. So, all right.
I love to hear that on the recording.
It kind of looks like an old
All right.
The webcam.
So, I'll go ahead and just stop it.